We all love Nintendo. They are by far the greatest video game company in the industry, bar none, with the best-selling hardware, the greatest IPs in gaming. We love this company. And in recent years, the company has reached new heights in releasing a bunch of new entries in several new franchises that a lot of people honestly never thought would see the light again. Games like Star Fox, games like F-Zero, games like Famicom Detective Club. So many of them, in fact, that the most requested IPs to return is radically different than it was like 10 or 20 years ago. So today, I wanted to take the time to count down 10 Nintendo IPs that I desperately want to see return. Usually, when people are talking about great launch title N64 games, they're talking about Super Mario 64. But it's really easy to forget that for a lot of people, Wave Race 64 was a really big deal, featuring really solid racing mechanics and a really interesting environment. The fact that waves were coming at you realistically was a really exciting thing at the time. And with modern technology, with improvements, with maybe doing something other than being on a jet ski, Nintendo could do a lot with the IP. Bring back Wave Race and, do all sorts of fun, interesting things with the concept, right? This is something that I think is long overdue for a proper return. I know I've been very, very critical of Wario Land fans in recent years because of the weird, bizarre insistence of attacking WarioWare because we're not getting a new Wario Land game. As if these franchises have anything to do with each other at all. No, people. The fact that WarioWare exists is not somehow magically getting rid of Wario Land games. These games are not getting made because they were never that successful. And that isn't to say that they aren't fantastic games in their own right. I've always been a big advocate for them, especially Wario Land Shake It. But there's a reason this series has not been a focus for Nintendo. But considering it's been over a decade since the last entry on Wii and a handful of DS-related spin-offs, it is time to bring Wario back in the limelight. Maybe not in a Wario Land game, but in kind of a platforming adventure thing in general, because these games do have a unique style and vibe that are very distinct from the Mario brand. I think this kind of thing could have a lot of appeal to an older demographic, and this is something that I really want to see more of. I really like the risks that Wario Land took back on the Game Boy. In a lot of ways, these are probably some of the best platformers on the console. And the fact that this series has been become kind of obscure in recent years is a crying shame. I want to see more Wario Land games.
Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting.
My personal favorite horror game, Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, is something that I wish got a lot more attention in the gaming sphere. It was a huge hit when it came out. It was considered one of the very best early GameCube titles. It was a big deal. Nintendo's first M-rated published game. It had a lot of innovative, inventive aspects to it, including the magic system and the sanity meter. It was slated to be really successful, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, the development studio collapsed, and Nintendo was never able to put out a successor. But by the way things look, there is no interest in releasing a successor. We don't even have a re-release or a remake, right? And it's so unfortunate considering how much potential this IP had to really dominate the horror landscape. I think there was a lot more gameplay potential with Eternal Darkness than there was with the vast majority of horror games, because this is a story that takes place over thousands of years, featuring dozens of characters in different historical periods. Like, imagine the potential with that. Assassin's Creed would go on to be one of the most successful IPs of all time with a similar premise. And Eternal Darkness is actually good. So, to think that Nintendo dropped the ball with this is unfortunate, but it is never too late to bring this thing back, to give it more attention, to give it more praise, to expose it to more audiences. At the very least, you can re-release it on Switch. Like, that would be a very positive start. Like, I think with today's demographic, they would have a very, very positive reaction to something like this coming out. You know, with Famicom Detective Club, Emiya the Smiling Man, I believe being like another once in a blue moon entry of an M-rated Nintendo game. Like, now's a really good time to talk about where it all began with Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. If there was ever a downplayed Nintendo IP, it was Codename Steam, featuring third-person strategy gameplay goodness from the creators of Advance Wars and Fire Emblem. Codename Steam was a rare attempt at Nintendo at putting out a new IP in a genre that they really had never done before. And unfortunately, the game completely bombed because people couldn't handle the visual art style, and it looked kind of generic to a Western audience. And that is very unfortunate, because this was a highly innovative, very creative piece of historical fiction of a team of superheroes led by Abraham Lincoln fighting aliens. Wonderfully voice acted, well written, engaging, compelling, featuring a lot of iconic literary characters like Tiger Lily and Quahog from Moby Dick. Like, featuring so many great creative elements that just blend together in this really creative, amazing experience. And it ends on a cliffhanger. That's right. After putting this game out and teasing a sequel, Nintendo has still not followed up on it. Even like almost a decade later, we still have not even seen this game released in HD. So this is definitely one of those games that I want to see more of. In this day and age, Kid Icarus Uprising has one of the strongest followings of any 3DS game. It often is put on the list on top 10 lists for the console, and is really fondly remembered as being this amazing, innovative, modern take on an iconic video game franchise that in and of itself had not had a new entry in 25 years. Kid Icarus was long overdue for a new entry when Kid Icarus Uprising came out. And now, over a decade later, we still have not gotten a sequel to Uprising. You know, a game that really desperately deserved it, right? A game that was so much fun, so endlessly entertaining, was criminally overlooked when it first came out. This is definitely one of those games that deserves its reputation as being one of Nintendo's all-time best. Pilot Wings is mostly remembered for being a tech demo for the Super Nintendo. It's really easy to forget just how much fun that original release really was. And it's also important to note that the sequels, 64 and Pilot Wings Resort, were extremely disappointing. This is an IP that has never had a really successful follow-up, and I think it is a very deep shame. Like, this is, oddly enough, one of the genres that Nintendo doesn't seem to be capable of competing with Microsoft in. Microsoft Flight Simulator is seen as the flight sim, and meanwhile Pilot Wings is just some like weird Super Nintendo novelty, a relic of the 90s. And it's certainly not because Pilot Wings is a bad game, far from it, but the idea of having all these challenges that you go through with all these different unique vehicles, like, there's definitely an appeal to it, but the series kind of suffers from this thing where it's simultaneously too complex and too easy, right? It's too simple. Like, I think, like, in order for a Pilot Wings game to really be good, they're going to have to really give it a lot of depth. They're going to give it a lot of replay value, a lot of different missions to uncover, make them really fun, and just really deliver on the flight simulation experience. Like, right, they really need to come up with an idea that really, really, really works. And I've never seen them do it with this specific thing. And I know they have it in them. I know that this game is absolutely has potential, but uh, I would really like to see them deliver sometime in the future. This should come as no surprise to anyone, considering I recently put Punch-Out for the Nintendo Wii as my all-time favorite Nintendo Wii game. Right, that's right. My all-time favorite game on my all-time favorite Nintendo console is Punch-Out for Nintendo Wii. And I'm also a big fan of Super and the original NES one. In fact, I've been playing the NES one a lot on streams, trying to beat it. But there is no denying that Punch-Out, although an iconic Nintendo franchise in its own right, is has never really gotten a ton of sequels. And if anything, one of the big issues Punch Out we had is that like it's very very similar to the old games, specifically the NES one. When you keep that in mind, it's really easy to think of this as a franchise that can't innovate, it can't do anything new. But the last one that came out in 2009. Right? They have plenty of opportunity to come back with a new one, with like new fighters, new mechanics, more challenge. There's definitely a lot of room for growth for this series, and it's a shame that it feels like nobody is really interested in pursuing it. Next Level Games raised the bar so high that I really don't think any fan of this series is going to be all that impressed with anything other than the very best. And I want to see the very best, right? I don't want to see a sequel just to get a sequel. Like when I get the Punch Out sequel that I'm looking forward to, I want it to be as good or better than the older games. Like I don't care how long it takes, but when it does get made, it needs to be good. Tadachi Life was a huge hit on Nintendo 3DS. So it baffles me that Nintendo has spent so much time not producing any new ones. Right? They introduced this franchise to the Western world. It took the world by storm. It was a huge deal. It sold like 10 million copies or something. It was a huge success story, right? It was hugely popular, in spite of its shortcomings, specifically the length and the lack of things to do. Like, I loved Tamagotchi Life. So to think that it's been a solid decade since the last one really makes me wonder just what exactly are they doing? Are they like planning the next big thing? Do they want to? Are they just doing nothing? Like it's so strange to me that they would put in so much effort in making the original Tamagotchi Life such a huge success story, such a huge deal for 3DS fans, and then just never follow up on it with a meaningful sequel. Uh, it's definitely a really interesting gap in the Switch's library because I, early on in the Switch's lifespan, I really thought a new Tamagotchi Life was imminent. Like I really thought this would be one of those things that like really spearheaded like the early Switch's success, but instead, we get nothing. Like again, we get Animal Crossing, which is one of the highest selling games of all time, but like Tamagotchi Life in comparison just has just completely disappeared. So Nintendo really needs to work to bring this back. People really forget how big of a deal the original Nintendogs was on the Nintendo DS, right? That was a game I was playing for years, putting all this time into training my dogs, taking care of them. I really, really liked the game, and I was always looking forward to the next gen experience of the idea, of the concept. And yet, for whatever reason, we never really got one. We never got improved AI. We never got more things to do with your dogs, right? Like we just ended up getting more of the same with a basic sequel on the 3DS, which I honestly don't even own. I never got around to playing it. So this is definitely one of those games that really is overdue for a comeback. Again, it's been such a shockingly long time that I don't necessarily know what Nintendo is thinking. Maybe it's just one of those things that they really want to keep on the back burner until they really make something new and impressive and really manage to deliver on something that people can be really impressed with, like the original Nintendogs. But I personally where is it? Like, it's one of those things. Just like, give me my Nintendogs, Nintendo. 10 years ago, it was really common to bring up a handful of specific Nintendo games when it came to franchises that desperately needed to come back or be rebooted. And back in the day, the big thing that people wanted to see retro studios make was Star Tropics. It was operating off the same kind of logic that Metroid Prime ran off of, right? In which it was a franchise and IP that was primarily popular with Westerners, right? That was targeted towards a Western audience being tackled by a Western studio. And over time, this idea slowly fell by the wayside to the point where, like, I feel as if most Nintendo fans don't even know what Star Tropics is. I myself have never actually played it. Well, I've never finished it. I played a little bit of it, but the game is really shockingly a really shockingly like Zelda-like experience in which set in a modern time period in which your character goes to a deserted island and fights giant snakes with yo-yos and stuff like that. It's very interesting that this got made and had such a big push behind it, and it even has some historical significance. I believe the second one, Star Tropics 2: Zoda's Revenge, is actually the last NES game that Nintendo ever produced in 1994. So this is definitely an IP that feels like it just never really found its footing, right? It was designed to appeal to Westerners, and because of just how long the sequel took to come out, it just never really reached the same heights that Zelda managed to hit like several years earlier, right? At that, by the time the sequel came around, like Donkey Kong Country was out. It's just one of those unfortunate things, and it's just one of those IPs that got lost in the shuffle, right? This year, Star Tropics 2 is 30 years old, and this IP has never even been hinted at coming back. It never gets mentioned in Smash Bros. It never gets like addressed. Like nobody really talks about it anymore. But this is definitely one of those things where you're just like, this IP had a lot of value. It had a lot of potential. Like a third entry or a remake would really do a lot, I think, to really emphasize Nintendo's creativity and the fact that they don't necessarily put out the same IPs over and over and over again. If anything, Star Tropics is an example of how they don't do that. Of how like it's so similar to Zelda and yet has its own unique style and flavor and tone. It's to me, it's really important to keep producing games like this, right? And in recent years, I feel like we haven't nearly gotten this kind of experience like we used to. To me, I think Nintendo should be proud of these kind of lower budget successes. They should be proud of games like this that people remember and look back on fondly, even if they don't become major hits, because this isn't about the money. It isn't about selling games. It isn't about like selling the best product. It is putting out a good experience for people to enjoy.